I've never recognized emo as a genre of music. I always thought it was the most term ever. Guy Picciotto, Rites of Spring, Fugazi. This is Home Is Where. Their 2023 album, The Wailer, might just be the most ambitious emo album I have ever heard. More on that later. So, in my mind, when they call another band's album important, my ears are gonna perk up. And that's precisely what happened when Berkeley DIY band Awake But Still in Bed released their 2023 album entitled Chaos Takes the Wheel and I'm a Passenger. Home Is Where called this album important. They seem to have used the word important deliberately there. It just started as a whisper in an Instagram story that I really wish I took a screen capture of, but it has echoed with increasing volume in my brain for almost a year now. Important. Why did they use the word important? There's a lot of weight that comes with that word important, especially when it's uttered by Home Is Where. So that left me with two options. The first and most obvious one was to just ask them. So I did just that. I asked them to no response. I wasn't expecting them to respond. Fair play. How do you answer that question in a DM anyway? I know that's kind of silly. But here we are at option number 2. You're looking at it, a deep dive video essay on the importance of modern emo. Hey, my name is Dan Frampton. Thanks for kicking back. I make videos about the underground DIY music scene, so if that sounds cool to you, hit like and subscribe. Today's video is all about finding out why Awake But Still in Bed's music is so important to the DIY scene. In doing so, we're gonna have to explore all the other most important albums throughout the over 40-year history of the genre. So glaze up a fresh stack of pancakes and strap the frick in. I'm not gonna get bogged down with the whole waves of emo thing. Get out of here with that nonsense. That's some rude boys rhetoric right there. Let's leave the waves talk to the ska scene, buckos. I will, however, have to use some sort of language to decipher the difference between eras and styles of emo, like emo-core, Midwest emo, and Lord have mercy on our soul, mall emo. These terms are a bit nebulous, but will be unfortunately necessary in order to tell this story. It's interesting to note that even since the origin of the term emo in the 80s, it isn't until recently that the term has been affectionately adopted. In the 80s, when people called Rites of Spring emotional hardcore or emo-core, the musicians scoffed. All hardcore is emotional, man, they said. In the 90s, emo was used derogatorily and somewhat misogynistically to insult the quiet kid at school that wrote poetry or whatever. This video isn't an exploration of the etymology of the word emo, so if you're looking for me to just name a bunch of bands and albums going painstakingly year to year with a detailed breakdown of exactly who inspired who, that's not gonna happen here. That sounds painful. If you want to argue among the true scholars of emo about the waves of emo and the bands held within, that's what Reddit is for. I'm not about that business. I'm more interested in why one of my favorite bands, Home Is Where, is calling Awake But Still in Bed so important. There's no way for me to read their minds to understand what context they meant by using such strong verbiage. But what I can do is figure it out for my own damn self. I figure if I analyze the big important albums from the major eras of emo, I'll be able to determine for myself if I think the word important was the correct word to use to describe the music of Awake But Still in Bed. Chapter 1. The Rites of Spring. As the 70s turned to 80s, punk rock music took a faster, more aggressive turn. This was the birth of hardcore. As bands at the time started to experiment with this new hardcore palette, it would only be natural for a full circle, melodic moment to occur. From the hardcore scene, we would get the forefathers of two more melodic punk rock styles that persist until this day. Milo Aukerman, Bill Stevenson, and the gang from California would start this little band called Descendants. Their album, Milo Goes to College, is one of the most influential records in the annals of punk rock. Bands that followed in these particular sing-songy shoes would end up being regarded as pop-punk bands. We're not going to worry about that side of things just yet. Our story today begins with the more moody and brooding branch of the melodic hardcore world. Heavily regarded as the first emo band, our tale begins in DC with a band known as Rites of Spring. Guy Picciotto, the singer and guitar player of the band, heavily rejected the term emo and doesn't want to be credited or associated with it in any way. When asked, he had this to say: "I've never recognized emo as a genre of music. I always thought it was the most term ever. I know there's this generic commonplace that every band that gets labeled with the term hates it. They feel scandalized by it. But honestly, I just thought all the bands I played in were punk rock bands. The reason I think it's so stupid is like what? The Bad Brains weren't emotional? What? There were robots or something? It just doesn't make sense to me." Regardless of his dismissal of the term, he's always going to be right here in the history books. Sorry, bud, you invented emo. You did this, Guy. 'Cause tonight will be the night that I will fall for you. Their band did something specific and different in the genre. It caught on and more bands were influenced based on those innovations. Musically, Rites of Spring doesn't really sound like what we associate emo to sound like today. Over again. It's fast, aggressive punk rock music. Only difference is the guy sings sometimes. This one time he was like, "If I cry, will you cry too?" And that's like unavoidably emo, dude. Singing about crying. Bands just weren't doing that at the time. But now they were allowed to, so they did. Rites of Spring formed in '83, put out an LP in '85, an EP in '87, played 19 shows and broke up. After the band broke up, two members would go on to form Fugazi with Ian MacKaye. Simply a more iconic sentence cannot be uttered. Oh, he's also the guy in the most iconic hardcore clip of all time. He is the basketball net guy. Moving on. Chapter 2. Sunny Day Real Estate. The 80s were well and good and all, but they were really no 90s. The 90s are when the chefs hit the kitchen to start really cooking. If Guy Picciotto brought the concept of personal lyrics to punk rock, Sunny Day Real Estate can be credited with so much more than that. For this section, all we have to do is take a look at their 1994 album, Diary. Lyrically, they step it up from being just personal to being truly reflective and introspective. Rites of Spring felt shrouded in brooding, unapproachable coolness, whereas listening to Sunny Day Real Estate makes you feel like you're staring into a naked soul. The vocal style of Jeremy Enoch is one that has been mimicked endlessly. His way of going from tender, soft, and melodic to anguished and enraged, sometimes in the same vocal line, has gone on to inspire many an emo singer. Keep this technique in mind when we get back to Awake But Still in Bed, because Shannon is a master of it. The album came out in 1994, and you can definitely smell the tail end of grunge off of every inch of this thing. There was still this snot-nosed rebellious attitude in the music. Instead of being like, "I'm angry, watch me smash," it was more like, "I'm sad and anxious, and you're gonna hear all about it." The post-grunge flair that they brought to the game would stay cozied up to emo-adjacent bands going forward. They brought dynamics into the picture in a way that would have been ridiculed by their predecessors. Soft parts? Are you kidding me? And then what? A mildly louder part? Get out of here with that. Yeah, you got that right, buddy. We're gonna call it Midwest emo, no matter where you're from, and it's awesome. Next question. Sunny Day Real Estate would play around with wacky time signatures and fun little riffs, leads, and screams, but it was the bands that came next that would blow that particular Pandora's box wide open. American Mike 99 and Captain Tim 2K have entered the chat. Chapter 3, Tim and Mike Kinsella, the founding brothers of Midwest Emo. The brothers' first band to gain notoriety was called Captain Jazz. In 1995, they released their only full-length album entitled Burritos, Inspiration Point, Fork Balloon Sports, Cards in the Spokes, Automatic Biographies, Kites, Kung Fu, Trophies, Banana Peels We've Slipped On, and Eggshells We've Tippy-Toed Over, or simply known as Schmap and Schmaz. Great album. It made sure that emo stayed punk. They kept the screaming and the shouting alive. Long album titles, inside jokes, and wordplay would be established early on as emo tropes. Get yourself a trumpet, play an atonal guitar riff, add a snare roll, and just wail your lungs out. Boom, you got a song. Out of all the important emo bands of the 90s, Captain Jazz is my personal favorite. But this video isn't about my favorite, it's about the most important. And in 1999, it cannot be argued that the most important Midwest emo album would drop. Mike Kinsella wanted to step away from behind the drum kit to front a band of his own. It would be this new band that would leave the lasting legacy on the genre. Saying that American football raised the bar with their debut LP would be a tragic understatement, a miscarriage of justice, and I will just not stand by such mediocre flowers, alright? They did just more than raise the bar. They took down the old bar, brought it to the woodshed, reinforced it, shined it up real pretty, then placed it back at a previously unimagined height. Mostly all emo after this point would become American football coded in some fashion or another. So much so that every aspect of the band is a meme in today's internet landscape. Like their band name, American Football, a total meme. This album cover, absolute meme. The typeface, you guessed it, total meme. To carry that sort of relevance 25 years after dropping is no laughing matter. Okay, never mind. It is kind of funny. Memes aside, if this record is so important, we gotta talk about it. Initially, the album came and went without much fanfare. The band pretty much knew it was a temporary project as they were writing and recording what would become known as LP1. By the year 2000, the band would indeed be broken up. However, the math rock tendencies, sparkly riffs, and jazz rhythms they used to create their Midwest emo magnum opus would go on to become even more emo tropes that the Kinsella family were responsible for pioneering. If Sunny Day Real Estate felt like a soul bearing itself to you, American Football's LP1 makes you feel the feelings being sung about in an I know that feeling, relatable sort of way. The way the emotions are articulated throughout the album are so visceral that it's hard to believe that the songs were written by a bunch of college kids. Without Mike and Tim Kinsella, emo would have taken a much different direction at the turn of the millennium. As Midwest emo was bubbling on the underground, the mainstream were about to get their particular brand of emo. We were about to get infected with mall emo, and it was about to fuck things up quite a bit. Chapter 4, 2000s mall emo. Here's where the two melodic branches of hardcore that diverged in the 80s would collide again. By the year 2000, pop punk was a well-established genre of rock and roll on MTV and the radio. Blink-182 would capture the hearts and minds of a generation with their songs about ex-girlfriends, aliens, and parties, while the other main pop-punk band, Green Day, were starting to feel pretty stale after they released their album Warning in the year 2000. Green Day desperately needed a fresh coat of paint. That fresh coat of paint would be borrowed from the underground and would come in the way of all black hair, clothes, and eyeliner. They sported this new emo look, but they waged a much more political war than an emotional war on their 2004 rebrand, American Idiot. Even though the band was making a political statement, mainstream casuals would start to associate this look with emo, thus muddying the waters even further. I feel they stole their look more from 18 Visions than from any emo band at the time, but either way. As this stuff started to take shape in the mainstream, Screamo started to mutate in the underground. Screamo would take the elements pioneered by emo bands and bring them back to the hardcore scene. To mixed receptions, of course. But it's here that Jeff Rickley of the band Thursday was brought on board to produce the first My Chemical Romance album, I Brought You My Bullets, You Brought Me Your Love. To me, this album sounds like pop punk with some screaming, in the way that Rites of Spring felt like hardcore with some singing, like an inverse type thing. But this album is still not what I consider to be the most important mall emo album. That unfortunate distinction, I believe, belongs to Fall Out Boy with their 2005 release, From Under the Cork Tree. I think this Fall Out Boy album is peak mall emo for so many reasons. One being that they were legitimately from the hardcore scene. They had a one foot in the underground thing working for them on many levels at the beginning. They kept a bit of the cred that bands like the Get Up Kids and Taking Back Sunday had, but were rubbing shoulders with the Good Charlottes of the world at the MTV VMAs. Fall Out Boy would also make heavy use of the emo accent that Blink-182 would also very much adopt, and most people outside of the underground would use this voice if they were asked to mimic the emo accent. Where are you? You know, that thing. So even though Fall Out Boy and all other mall emo bands are just pop punk bands that have reappropriated the underground, they will always be a part of the emo discussion. Even though I think they more belong under the descendants rung of melodic hardcore. Even so, if you're bopping around to Hawthorne Heights and want to call it emo, I'm not gonna yell at you. Have your fun. Just do me a favor. Pick me up a pair of size 9 Vans slip-ons next time you're at Zoomies. Chapter 5, 2010's Midwest Emo Revival, The Acceptance of Emo. There is no doubt in my mind how important modern baseball is to the overall mosaic that is modern day emo. To understand, we only need to look at their 2012 debut album, Sports. The way they use the athletic motif directly references American football, and by doing so, it accomplishes two big things. Firstly, it places them firmly in the timeline of emo history, and secondly, it reaffirms American football as the root of the 2010s Midwest Emo Revival. What Sports accomplished lyrically is what I find to be their most important contribution to the genre. Modern baseball famously has two singer-songwriters, Bren Lukens and Jake Ewald. Both of these talents are able to bring a level of storytelling using specific, mundane, everyday scenarios to draw the listener in. The emo figures from previous generations felt like rock stars on a pedestal, whereas the lyrics and stories told by modern baseball made them feel like they were our friends. We heard our high school stories through their high school stories. It was a mirror type effect. Nothing here felt like a silly Blink-182 song. It decoded the feelings and themes that were heard in Rites, Sunny Day, and American football songs, but they attached those emotions directly to tangible moments that we, the audience, could place in our own lives. That's huge. Jake and Bren's voices sound sonically similar. Their writing style is also alike, but there are subtle differences you can start to pick out. Bren is a bit more conversational, and Jake is a bit more sentimental. There's an undeniable charisma and chemistry that radiates off these two artists when they perform together. I hate when people use this word, but there's something magical about it. It's crazy that these two people existed at the same time, let alone occupied the same band. With all this American football worship going on in the 2010s, it would inspire the American football themselves to reform in 2014 and release LP 2. If that's not important, I don't know what is. Emo is now no longer a slur. Bands and fans of the bands are now adopting the term endearingly. Now that the term emo is being accepted and used in online discourse positively, our favorite group of people on the internet, Redditors, started to police and gatekeep what real emo is. Yeah, what started as an insult thrown by the gatekeepers is now being argued about what is real by the gatekeepers. It made way and gave birth to the real emo copy pasta. You know it, you love it, but if you forget it, it goes a little bit something like this. Real emo only consists of the DC emotional hardcore scene and the late 90s screamo scene. What is known by Midwest emo is nothing but alternative rock with questionable real emo influence. When people try to argue that bands like My Chemical Romance are not real emo while saying that Sunny Day Real Estate is, I can't help not to cringe because they are just as fake emo as My Chemical Romance, plus the pretentiousness. Real emo sounds energetic, powerful, and somewhat hateful. Fake emo is weak, self-pity, and a failed attempt to direct energy and emotion into the music. Some examples of real emo are Page 99, Rites of Spring, Captain Jazz, the only real emo band to come from the Midwest scene, and Loma Prieta. Some examples of fake emo are American Football, My Chemical Romance, and Mineral. Emo belongs to hardcore, not indie, pop punk, alt rock, or any other mainstream genre. Again, I'm not about that business. There could be much more extrapolated from the revival scene, but for the purposes of today's video, let's just keep the storytelling ushered in here front of mind going forward. In order to fully answer the awake but still in bed important question, we gotta take a look at the modern day emo scene. So what the hell is even going on out there these days anyway? Chapter 6, the modern day DIY emo scene of the 2020s. Emo is finally emo. Bands like Hot Mulligan and Mom Jeans sit atop the emo mountain these days. However, they've gotten so big that they're not really playing DIY shows anymore. If we're gonna find out whether or not Awake But Still in Bed is important or not, we should really keep our gaze set to the underground DIY scene. Since emo is now accepted, bands are going ham. To truly see the reach of the Midwest emo sound, the first place I think we should look is the farthest away. The existence of American football suggests that there should be a Chinese football, right? Well, there is, and they're awesome. But I much prefer Osaka, Japan's White Surf. Their 2024 album, Sweet Pop, totally rules. Used to open up the windows, used to try to make it nice. As cool as all that is, the emo engines are really revving much harder in the United States right now. It's like a David versus Goliath thing with Frat Mouse versus California DIY. I'm not worried though, because their songwriting weapon is among the sharpest out there. I've said it before, but standard emo tropes in any other set of hands are pipe bombs in the hands of the band's main songwriter, Truman Sinclair. Talk about making everyday mundane moments into emotional, highly charged emo music. Next, I want to talk about the coolest DIY emo band going today, and that's Prince Daddy and the Hyena. Their 2015 EP, Adult Summers, in my mind is among the best emo records of all time. Top 10. In 2022, they released a self-titled full-length that proved that they're still among the very best going today. Their songs carry a sense of urgency and a whimsical irreverence that can only be pulled off by natural-born chillers. Portland's Swiss Army Wife is criminally underrated. They are pulling off some of the best stuff in this style to a measly 7,000 monthly listeners. Their 2023 album, Medium Gnarly, scratches the entire itch, and I'm just dying for them to have a breakout moment. We almost have enough information to start figuring out if Awake But Still in Bed is all that in a bag of chips. We can almost cycle back to The Wailer, but before we do, let's take a look at one more band to get a fuller picture of the emo landscape today. It is important to look at the band TRSH. Literally, that's their name. TRSH. Trash. Just a bunch of Midwest emo trash, bro. This is the band to take that tippy-tappy math riff style to its logical conclusion. American football did it soft, trash does it fast and sweaty. All the bands are doing generational work out there and the tapestry is healthy, but there are two creative powerhouses left to explore. We finally have enough information to start to understand the basics of the two bands that started this video. Home is Where and Awake But Still in Bed. Chapter 7, The Wailer by Home is Where. There has never been a band like Home is Where. They are a genuine first of their kind. No band in the history of ever has been able to successfully blend the styles that this band is bold enough to mix together. Hillbilly music, screamo, 60s folk, hardcore. It's a miraculous potpourri out there. Brandon McDonald, frontwoman of the band, plays a fucking saw for Christ's sake. They are the most Bob Dylan emo band to ever exist, and I don't say that lightly. I say that knowing exactly who and what Bob Dylan is and represents. They are that for emo. They are more creatively nuanced and layered than any other band I have encountered. Their 2023 album, The Wailer, that I keep mentioning, is a tremendous creative achievement that they should be very proud of. It takes storytelling elements and ramps them up to a conceptual, dare I say, cinematic level. There's a reason why when they call something important, I gotta listen. I don't want to leave out the other members of the band, but to know Home is Where is really to know singer Brandon McDonald and guitarist Tilly Comorney. A more perfect musical duo just doesn't exist. They're a musical match made in Florida. I mean, heaven, but literally Florida. But The Wailer wouldn't have come out the way that it did if it wasn't for producer Jack Shirley. Jack Shirley is the man responsible for producing Sunbather by Deafheaven, which was the record in particular that made Brandon want to record with Jack. At first it seems crazy. Sunbather's like this American black metal thing. People have called it black gaze. But I'm like, are you sure? Black gaze? You want to go with black gaze? Black gaze. Okay, alright, black gaze it is. Moving on. Regardless, that's not exactly the album you think of when you think of Home is Where. Jack's catalog is crazy though. Jack has produced for Gulch, Torso, Joyce Manna, Lorma Prieta, a million others, and not to mention, he produced every Jeff Rosenstock album. So it's reasonable to say that Home is Where was in a safe pair of hands recording with Jack Shirley. The entire album explores the character, or the concept of The Wailer, which Brandon has chosen to be deliberately obtuse about. I think that it's easy to get lost in the metaphors and the messages of the songs. Overthinking it becomes a natural instinct because of the aura that the album carries. Yes, there are metaphors and allusions around every nook and cranny of this thing. Do I know the meanings behind all of them? No, of course not. But if I'm asked who The Wailer is, to me, I go with the literal. I'm going to apply Occam's razor to this bad boy. The Wailer is literally and simply the singer of the band, Brandon McDonald. The author. She literally tells us as much in the second song, Lily Pad Pupils. Let me get the lyric sheet really quick here. The lyric goes like this, and I quote, I am the Wailer. I am the Wailer. I am the Wailer. Case closed. I don't think it gets any more clear than that. The real question is, what are the whales? Maybe 9/11 is a whale. Perhaps gender inequality is a whale. The topics are the whales. But the topics are more than just topics. The topics are the whales that the Wailer has to relentlessly kill day in and day out just by being themselves. But I don't know, dude. I have the brain of a gerbil. The point is, this is a writing level that the genre has yet to encounter until this point. We're dealing with literal literature over here. I'm not kidding about that Bob Dylan stuff. This music is leagues above the rest, and we might not have had the chance to hear it had it not been for Shannon Taylor of Awake But Still in Bed. Up until this point in the video, it may have seemed like Home is Where came first, but that's not the case. Awake But Still in Bed blew up in 2018, whereas Home Is Where didn't drop until 2019. As Brandon mentioned in an interview with YouTube channel Enough Music Chris, it was Shannon that actually shouted out Home Is Where. Shannon was the first person with a platform to give Home Is Where their appropriate flowers. So, Home Is Where calling Awake But Still in Bed important didn't carry any weight with me because of clout. It came from a place of my admiration of their craft. If a band capable of making The Wailer calls another artist important, I'd have been silly not to take notice. So now, with all this history as context, is important the correct word to describe the music of Awake But Still in Bed. Chapter 8. Shannon Taylor is awake but still in bed. I really don't want this to feel like a Wikipedia read, but the story of Awake But Still in Bed literally is the story of Shannon Taylor. Shannon Taylor is awake but still in bed. Literally, she adjusts the band lineup around her creative needs at any given moment. She was born in Mesquite, Texas, and lived there until high school. Her family moved and she finished high school in Philadelphia. After that, she headed to San Jose to live with her long-distance boyfriend. Emo as frick right off the bat. Before she learned about all this emo stuff, there was one songwriter that inspired her growing up. She reveals on a podcast that John Flansburgh of They Might Be Giants makes up the primordial goo of her inspiration. She didn't say the goo part. I added that goo part. I'm the goo man. My goo! But the reason why I love this is because you don't normally get that honest of an answer out of an artist about their inspirations. Mentioning They Might Be Giants as someone coming up in the DIY scene is gonna turn some heads. But it's this answer that shows us the level of self-awareness and introspection that Shannon is in possession of. There have been other times when she was asked the same question about her inspirations in interviews, and it went, let's say, much more awkwardly. So to eventually get that They Might Be Giants nugget shows reflection and growth. In interviews, she said that her family life was toxic and shitty, so she would absorb herself with socializing. I mention this because adding socializing to the toolkit is another aspect of her game that is just working in her favor, especially in the music world. Knowing people is everything. Having them love you is another. She doesn't just seem to know everybody, everybody seems to love her. Putting that social superpower on the back burner for a moment so we can discuss the music, because it's the music that truly makes Awake But Still in Bed special. In 2018, Shannon would release her first album entitled What People Call Low Self-Esteem is really just seeing yourself the way that other people see you. This thing is packed to the brim with everything we spoke about so far. Her soft melodies that give way to her scorned screams are blood-curdling. Every line reveals more about Shannon herself and how specific things made her feel. It's storytelling in the same way that modern baseball is, but instead of seeing ourselves as the main character, Shannon is the main character here. And not in an egotistical sort of way, but in a cathartic sort of way. Each melody matches perfectly with the mood being conveyed. It's this particular skill that I find astounding. Shannon has the ability to connect emotionally with the context of the lyrics in a way that a great actor connects the emotion and physicality to the dialogue. Each line is purposeful, and her way of embodying the emotion of the lines as she's singing them is what brings everything together. You feel her melancholy in the tender moments. You understand the anguish immediately when confronted with it. The buttery smooth way she scales her vocal range makes it all possible. She manages to pull all this off live as well. Here's a clip of her putting her vocal style into her own words.
I try really hard to connect to the lyrics and like the emotions behind them and just like, you know, what I'm singing about and like it, and have it come out that way because oh man, this is gonna sound really stupid. Get ready for this.
I'm ready. We're ready.
Basically, shows are really distracting environments for me. Social interaction is really distracting for me, and I use it as like a distraction from my from my problems.
Right, yeah.
Not all the time, you know, obviously you have to interact with people all the time. So, but
Yeah,
like
yeah.
a lot of times, like, you know, you'll hang out with a friend, because you just don't want to think about how miserable you are.
Yeah.
Or
Right,
how,
yeah.
you know, depressed or, you know, whatever you are. Even if I'm anxious, you know, if I'm anxious a lot of time, I want to be around more people because
Yeah.
then I feel less singled out and like there's less attention on me. It's like things like that. Shows in general, I'll have so many things going on in my head.
Yeah.
So many responsibilities. So a successful show for me is when I can put all those distractions away and actually connect to my emotions in the middle of this extremely distracting environment.
Yeah,
Right,
for sure.
Totally.
And because that is how I'm going to, like, I don't know, really have a fulfilling performance for myself.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and I think if I have a fulfilling performance for myself, other people will.
Right, yeah.
The hope is that they'll connect to it.
Yeah.
You see, to her, it's putting herself back in the emotion she felt when writing it. That's gotta be draining to do on a nightly basis. Here's a clip of her explaining why being on the road is an extremely positive environment for this.
That is part of the reason that touring is such an extremely positive environment for me, because what ends up happening is every single day I'm like going through this cathartic processing of my anxiety, and by the end of it I just feel so like, you know, like at the end of the day I'm like sleeping on the floor with my like 3 friends I've brought with me or whatever,
Right,
and I
yeah.
just feel like so at peace.
Yeah.
She gets to process everything in a creatively fulfilling way that is unique and genuine to her as a human being and as an artist. And in the process, those emotions add to the stories she's telling, making her art that much more potent. If you read other reviews or bios of the band, you might see them listed as being from San Jose, which makes sense. That's where Shannon first set up shop in California. She's now based out of Berkeley, which makes much more sense for the band. If we're talking about importance and history, it doesn't hurt to align yourself with the city that houses Gilman. As the years pile on and new generations discover the genre, it leads to more confusion. Here's a tweet of Shannon's trying to understand how emo is being used these days. Quote, "Correct me if I'm wrong, but what I understand from current online emo discourse is that kids now use emo to refer to 2000s pop punk. Midwest emo to refer to 2010s to current pop punk, fifth wave emo to refer to hyperpop, and scrams to refer to emo. Have I got that right?" End quote. And all of that leads us to the album that started me off down this rabbit hole in the first place. Awake But Still in Bed's 2023 LP, Chaos Takes the Wheel, and I'm a Passenger. This is the album that Home Is Where called important. Knowing that Home Is Where could be speaking from a bit of a friendly bias, I could go into this fully skeptical. But seeing what Shannon was able to accomplish previously is nothing short of astronomical, therefore I don't sense much hyperbole in Home Is Where's words in this instance. Chaos would take the foundation Shannon laid on low self-esteem, and she expanded upon it in a more deliberately cinematic way. If her singing her own songs felt like a great actor acting, now this thing is an entire film. The album is paced like a film. A deeply personal, introspective, conceptual film. Like you're not watching this in a sticky Cineplex. This is an indie darling film fest type film. Except it's an emo album. The Wailer told its story in a sort of mystical way. Chaos Takes the Wheel sees Shannon direct this film with much less ambiguity. While we don't get the twisting metaphors and head-spinning riddles of a Home Is Where album, don't mistake that for a lack of richness. This album manages to do everything that the genre has ever had to offer, and it does it all without batting an eye. So, is important the appropriate word to describe the music of Awake But Still in Bed? Unequivocally, yes. But Home Is Where is right up there too. We're on an emo creative plane that has yet to be traveled. It's very exciting. You know what else is exciting? That you watched the entire video. Thank you so much for that. Like and subscribe, and until my next upload, watch another upload.